Hi, everyone. My name is Mindy Thompson, and I am one of our co-directors for CCWT. And I'm just absolutely thrilled to introduce our guest presenter this morning, Dr. Vanessa Delgado. I'm going to say a few words about her. As a assistant professor, she already has done such amazing things, and I don't want to take too much of our time by talking through everything that I could be sharing about how wonderful and brilliant she is, but I'll share just a few things to introduce her and give you all a sense of who she is and the work that she does. Dr. Vanessa Delgado is an assistant professor of sociology at Washington State University. Her research explores the incorporation pathways and educational experiences of Latino and Latina families. She employs qualitative methods to examine how Latina families navigate punitive immigration laws and policies and a restrictive socio-political climate. Articles from her research are published in multiple spaces, including Law and Policy, Journal of Latinos in Education, Sociology Compass, Social Sciences, and Journal of Marriage and Family. Dr. Delgado is currently working on a book project called The Integration Labor: How Children of Immigrants Negotiate Laws, Belonging, and U.S. Society, which is a longitudinal interview-based project that follows the lives of 60 college-educated Latinx children of immigrants in Southern California. Dr. Delgado attended Washington State University and was the first in her family to attend college. She first learned about graduate school as a Ronald E. McNair Scholar. As a McNair Scholar, she learned about how to conduct research and presented at various national conferences. She earned her bachelor's degree in sociology in 2015 and pursued a PhD at the University of California, Irvine. She earned both a master's and PhD in sociology from the University of California, Irvine in 2022. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vanessa Delgado.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you all of you for joining me this morning/afternoon, wherever you are. I also want to thank Melissa, Mindy, Matthew, and all others behind the scenes at the Center for College to Workforce Transitions for the invitation and the opportunity to be able to share some of the research that I've been working on. My name is Vanessa Delgado, and I'm an assistant professor of sociology at Washington State University. And my talk today is titled The College to Workforce Transition for Immigrant-Origin Latino Young Adults. And this talk will examine how Latino young adults who come from immigrant families enter the world of work during the COVID-19 pandemic. To begin, I wanted to provide an overview of my research and how I got to the specific study that I'm going to share with you all today. Broadly, my research examines the integration experiences of Latino immigrant families. And within this work, I study the labor that children of immigrants do to help their parents adjust to life in the United States. For instance, I'm sure many of you have heard, or maybe you've even done it yourself, children of immigrants who translate conversations, read English documents, or broker interactions alongside or with their parents. And my book project examines how young adults carry this responsibility into adulthood as they go off to college and begin their independent lives. Since 2018, I have followed a cohort of 30 young adults to explore how they juggle the responsibility to help while also fulfilling their duties in college. I began this project in 2018, where I interviewed 60 young adults, all of whom were college students at the time living in Southern California. And I wrapped up data collection at the start in January of 2023. And then a couple months later, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The project wasn't initially supposed to be a longitudinal project, but I thought it'd be important to follow up with these young people to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic was affecting their lives. So I decided to follow up with the young adults and explore how COVID-19 affected their family responsibilities, but also their college experiences. And it was during the second wave that I began to notice some of the troubles that the young adults were facing as they were graduating college during the pandemic. Those that had graduated in the spring of 2020 talked about the anxiety of an uncertain job market, and many had decided to push back their graduation dates. I did a final wave with the young adults earlier this year in 2023 as a postdoctoral fellow at Stony Brook University. And in the sample, the majority of the young adults had graduated college and were able to speak about their experiences and how they transitioned into the world of work. As I began to examine their work lives, I developed a series of different research questions to help me understand what was going on with the data. So, first, I asked, what are the postgraduate experiences of immigrant origin Latino young adults? I also asked, how, if at all, do immigrant origin college graduates experience mobility once they enter the labor market full time? And then three, in what ways did the COVID-19 pandemic affect immigrant origin Latino young adults, their postgraduate experiences? And altogether, these questions were used to help guide me through the data and help me make sense of how recent college graduates experience the pandemic at a critical point in their lives. I want to spend some time discussing the research on immigrant origin college students in higher education. In this presentation, you'll hear me talk about immigrant origin college students, and that is a term that's used to capture first generation immigrant students or the children of immigrants. And all of the young adults in the sample were immigrant origin students when they were in college. Immigrant origin students have caught the attention of educators, administrators, and certainly researchers like myself, because immigrant origin students now make up a significant proportion of young adults who pursue college degrees in the United States. The significant increase and strong presence of immigrant origin students in higher education has also garnered the attention of news and media outlets, such as the New York Times, for instance, who's dubbed these young people sort of the new face of higher education. Immigrant origin students now make up a significant proportion of the young people that are attending college. Estimates are suggesting that about 5.3 million college students, or almost nearly 30%, come from immigrant families. Immigrant origin students account for about 60% of the growth in university enrollments in the last 2 decades. Now, this growth looks different based on their category of immigrant origin. We have seen about an increase of 26% for those that are first generation immigrant students. And notably, we've seen a tremendous growth specifically for the second generation, so the children of immigrants. And we've seen a growth of nearly 131% between 2000 and 2018. There's a huge jump. And then we've seen a growth of about 15% for young adults from native born families. So to that end, the population of immigrant origin college students has outgrown that of college students from native born families. In this presentation, I'll focus specifically on Latino immigrant origin college students, and that's intentional for several reasons. First, most immigrants tend to come from Latin American countries, and as a result, most of the children of immigrants are also Latino at about 57%. Latinos are also among one of the fastest growing populations in the United States, as estimates suggest that the Latino community will grow to about 111 million by 2060. More than half of the Latinos in the United States are Mexican at about 60%, and about a third of all Latinos are immigrants. And as I just mentioned, most immigrants tend to come from Latin American countries. Latinos are also more likely to experience unfavorable socioeconomic, political, and legal standing in the United States. For instance, socioeconomic disadvantages and residential segregation can place Mexican origin youth in schools that are riddled with disorganization, deprived resources, institutional racism, learning distractions, discontinuity between teachers and students, lower academic quality, and limited student-focused interventions. And it's also important to note that half of the Mexican and Central American migrants are undocumented, which has implications as those unfavorable conditions can have negative effects on the children of those specific immigrants. The young adults in this study graduated during COVID-19, and as we all know and can attest to, the COVID-19 had an undeniable impact on everybody's lives, especially college students. Early research suggests that the mental health was severely affected, where college students experienced increased levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. Much of that stress focused on the uncertainties of life at that time, new transitions, making decisions about whether going home or staying on the college campus, severed relationships with friends and colleagues, job losses on campus, and so forth. Academic life became ruptured with everything transitioning online and sort of having to navigate this new world of Zoom. Many young adults found themselves taking on additional family responsibilities. For example, in my research, I have found that college students help their younger siblings and their immigrant parents navigate new technology and bureaucratic barriers. Many help their parents learn how to create email, how to join Zoom, how to make a Zoom account, how to do Microsoft Teams, and also complete assignments online. And also when discussing immigrant origin students, we can't ignore the important role that immigration status plays in the lives of Latino young adults. COVID-19 pandemic complicated the lives of undocumented and mixed status families, where many were excluded from pandemic relief programs and most social services. So the growth of immigrant origin students has important implications for our labor force, especially because once they graduate, they will be the primary contributors to the labor growth in the United States. So understanding the unique experiences of Latino college graduates during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic can help us develop strategies on how to best support these students as they transition out of college. The study draws on 90 in-depth longitudinal interviews that are used to capture the transition from college to workforce among immigrant origin Latino young adults. The interviews are a subset of interviews from a larger multi-wave project that examined the labor that children of immigrants contribute to their families before, during, and then after the COVID-19 pandemic. So I conducted wave one at the end of 2018 and very start, January 2020, and I conducted 60 interviews with Latino young adults. And like I mentioned, it wasn't intentional to be a longitudinal project, but then the COVID-19 pandemic hit several months later after I had just finished wrapping up wave one interviews. So then I decided to do a follow-up with these young people. And I did 30 interviews. I reached out to the entire sample. Half of the sample was willing to talk to me again. And so I ended up with 30 interviews instead of the full 60. And in this wave, I conducted in the fall of 2022, and then I captured how the COVID-19 pandemic had affected their studies and their own personal lives. And then I decided to do a final wave, wave three, from January to April of 2023, earlier this year. And I followed up with the same 30 young adults that I followed up at wave two. And this last wave focused on sort of their transition into adulthood and also their transition into the world of work, given that most of them already at that point had graduated and now were working jobs. The present study draws on data collected when the participants were college students, so at wave one and wave two, and then after they graduated college at wave three. And the data is ideal to address the research questions, given that it provides sort of a thorough glimpse of the transition from college to workforce at various points in participants' lives. Here, this table provides the sample demographics for the 30 participants at the very last wave, so wave three. Most of the participants in this project were women, 25 years of age, of Mexican origin, were social science majors, US-born citizens, and had an average annual income of about $40,000. At the time of wave three, most participants had graduated with their bachelor's at about 87%, or were in their very last year with an anticipated graduation date of spring 2023. Only one of the participants that I had followed throughout time discontinued their schooling due to pandemic-related challenges. And most of the participants held full-time work or pursued additional schooling to enrich their vocational skill set. Participants who had completed their bachelor's had a range from 2 years to 6 months in the world of work by the time of the last interview at wave three. Interviews at wave three focused on sort of 5 general themes. 1, college graduation. 2, COVID-19 interruptions. 3, family responsibilities. 4, work lives. And then 5, attitudes towards adulthood. I'd carefully reviewed all the participants' responses at wave 1 and wave 2, and then created a tailored interview guide for each of the participants. These targeted interview guides allowed me to ask specific questions to each of the interviewees and be able to get an update on matters that we had discussed in previous interviews at wave 1 and then at wave 2. When discussing the transition to the workforce, I probed for details about how the job was acquired, the duties and tasks of the job, compensation, usefulness of college degree, and then overall job satisfaction. And the interviews lasted anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, and then each participant received a $50 compensation for their wave 3 interview. So now I'll turn to the findings, and here I'll provide sort of an overview of the key findings, and we'll go in more detail in the slides to come. So we'll talk a little bit about the COVID-19 disruptions to their education, delayed starts and bumpy roads to finding a job, increased financial pressures at home, and then finally immigration status, specifically for those who were undocumented in the sample. The sample have reported that the COVID-19 pandemic influenced their decision to push back the graduation dates. In most cases, young adults took on an extra year of schooling because the pandemic hindered their ability to complete major or minor requirements, laboratory work, or other school-based projects. Some participants, like Melissa, shared that they pushed back their graduation dates in hope that life would return to some type of normalcy within the next year. She shared, I ended up taking on an additional year and graduating June 2022. And in large part, that was the pandemic. I was holding on to hope that things would return to some type of normalcy and I'd be able to get my final year in person. Marissa later went on to share that she began major hopping during her fourth year in college, and she elected to pursue a second major in education, but couldn't take the course requirements to complete the major. Marissa was told that the pandemic had affected some of the course offerings and the final classes she needed would not be offered until the next year. So she shared, I ended up sticking with education. I ended up staying at her college to focus, to finish that course for that major. Marissa was happy with her decision to stay an extra year because it helped her close off her undergraduate studies with an in-person ceremony and greater clarity about her future. In 2023, she was a graduate student in a master's program pursuing a career in education. Other students attempted to push back their graduation dates, but were unable to do so. And they did not have the financial means to be able to stay an extra year in school. For instance, Larry, a criminology undergraduate, tried to push back his graduation date an extra year to sort of figure things out. The pandemic had ruptured a stimulating campus life, and entry into the real world really began to look grim for him. Larry had exhausted all his financial aid support and was required to graduate June 2020. His transition into post-college life was really difficult as he struggled to solidify his work plans. He shared, I graduated and I didn't have anything set after graduation. I spent maybe a month not really doing much. I dreaded graduating because COVID put kind of everyone in a difficult situation. So then my graduation plans were kind of thrown all over the place. I felt scared, definitely worried, really stressed because COVID brought on so many other difficulties, academically, financially, emotionally. After graduation, I didn't really apply to many jobs. I was home. I came home because that was the most affordable thing to do. Larry focused his time on trying to pass his courses, but didn't feel in the right headspace to apply to jobs. He worked in construction and had worked with his father in construction for several months before he had received a call to work at a local university. Reports suggest that about a quarter of college goers dropped out of college due to pandemic-related issues, and Christopher was the only one in my sample that did drop out. His story gives insight into how working-class students grappled with their educational demands and their family duties. Christopher was a first-generation college student who grew up in Los Angeles. He was the eldest of two and frequently sent money back home to his mom to help raise his little brother. The pandemic devastated his family as his mother had lost her job. Her undocumented immigration status made her ineligible for most pandemic relief programs. Christopher felt an immense pressure to go back home and contribute financially. He made the decision to leave his university and help his family stay afloat during the pandemic. He shared with me, I helped my mom financially. And with my brother, we had doctor's appointments, school. I had to take care of him. Juggling school, having to work, paying my rent, my bills, all that just took a toll. I entered a depressive state where I was just like, I need to go back home. I need to prioritize this and finish school later. Christopher picked up different jobs at local grocery stores and then transitioned into a position at a local elementary school. He felt that his education at the university didn't prepare him for the uncertainties of the labor market. He felt that his decision to leave the university was sort of the right choice at the time because his mother really needed the financial and caregiving support. And I want to turn to the second theme that emerged in the data. Most of the young adults who were in the world of work, that were working, did not feel that the work that they were doing related to their field of study. For instance, Manny felt disappointed in the real world after he graduated. He applied widely and was unable to find work in his field. He ended up receiving a call from a firm looking for an IT specialist, and he became an IT auditor after a 4-month-long job search. So he shared, I'm not doing what I studied for, to be honest. I graduated with finance and marketing. That's not what I do. And then I asked him, well, what do you do for work? And he says, I work as an IT auditor for a firm. Although this position was unrelated to his major, Manny felt that the job was a great position. The company he worked for provided him a competitive salary and opportunities for growth within the company. The financial benefits from this position allowed him to contribute to the economic well-being of his family. Although Manny felt a mismatch between his major choice and occupation, the financial security of the position helped him feel content about his current position, and he planned to stay in this position long term. Avicenna also struggled to find a job that directly aligned with her specialization. She encapsulated the juxtaposition of excitement and fear that many graduates face upon college completion when she shared, graduation was really exciting because I'm the first in my family to get a degree, to graduate college. At the same time, it was really scary because I feel like there's a lot of expectations to get a good paying job once you have that degree, you know? Maricela went months without finding a job and ultimately became an HR for a local women's athletic store. Unlike Manny, Maricela did not feel satisfied with her current position and viewed her current position as a stepping stone for a better opportunity in the future. She shared, it took a while to get a job. It was pretty stressful because not a lot of places are hiring with Chicano Latino studies degrees. It's kind of niche. It took a few months, honestly, but I found one. Maricela was grateful for her position as her position allowed her to learn sort of new skills about company management. And she intended to broaden her skill set with this position in hopes that sort of a better opportunity would emerge in the future. Participants who were unable to find occupations within their specialization took on odd jobs to be able to make money. Josie graduated with a degree in education in the spring of 2021. Josie had worked at the front desk for a college department and really liked working at the university setting. She was under the impression that this office job would continue after graduation, so she didn't worry about applying for other positions. She said, I thought I had something lined up with the department I was working at for 2 to 3 years. I ended up not getting the job on campus, so I was unemployed for at least 8 months or a year after graduation. Josie took some time to focus on her transition out of college and moved back home with her parents to save money. She applied widely to jobs that aligned with her interest and education with no luck. Josie began to feel the pressure to contribute financially at home, so she worked with her mother as a caregiver and a housekeeper for residents in Orange County. She later became a barista at a local coffee shop and was in a temporary position now at a university and was hopeful that this position would work out for her. She shared, I was working full-time with my mom. I got really tired. I was just applying. I kept applying, and I didn't get anywhere until August 2022. I applied for a coffee shop. I worked at a coffee shop until this year. This year, I got a rare opportunity to be part of a temp position at a university. They said, I can get an opportunity to become full-time if they really like me. Now I want to discuss the financial pressures young adults experience once they enter the world of work. At Wave 1 and Wave 2, most participants were in college and sent a range of anywhere from $100 to $300 a month to their parents. At Wave 3, most had entered the workforce and were now regularly contributing to their family's economic well-being. Manny would send home a few $100 here and there when he held a part-time campus job in college. Now his well-paying job allows him to cover a lot more expenses at home. So I'd asked him, are you contributing to rent or bills at your parents' house? And he says, basically, I pay all of those now. I pay the water, the trash, electricity, internet, and TV bill. From time to time, I help buy groceries, but not a lot at the moment. My mom, for many years, she had a really crappy car. It was one of those with rust and everything. No AC, no hot air to blow out. For so many years, I was able to get her a brand new 2021 Jeep. Manny's experience provides insight into how college opens up access to greater paying jobs for adult Latino children of immigrants, but it also positions them to become the top earners in their working class families. Ariana, like many participants, contemplated moving out of the parental home after graduation. At Wave 2, she lived with her parents in San Diego and considered moving out once her career plans became more concrete. She contributed greatly to the household during the COVID-19 pandemic because her undocumented father had lost his job. And she told me, I would give money for rent. I'm the one that pays the Wi-Fi and the phone bills. I took on a greater responsibility. At Wave 3, she had moved out of her parents' home and moved in with her longtime boyfriend. She stopped making major contributions to her parents' household, but then felt really bad about not helping. She says, I felt really bad about being able to save money and not helping my parents, that low income first gen guilt. So I decided helping my dad pay rent again. It's not a lot, but it's something that I know helps him. So since October, I think I started helping my dad pay rent on home on top of me paying rent where I live. It's honestly really hard to do all this. Ariana didn't feel direct pressure from her parents to contribute rent. Whether Rather, it was their undocumented immigration status that compelled her to help them. She was well aware of how her parents earned very little compared to their relative hard work and how they struggled to find work that wouldn't put them at risk of deportation. She felt that her status as a college educated citizen provided her greater financial opportunities that she leveraged to be able to help her parents out. Other young adults felt pressure to support their parents because they simply held the most secure financial status in the family. Eduardo had graduated with a master's in public health and worked at a research center in Los Angeles. He generally took care of all the bills, including his mother's phone bill and auto insurance. The financial pressure took a toll on him as he had to stretch his $50,000 annual salary to cover most of the family's expenses. So I'd asked him, it seems like you're paying for a lot. How do you deal with all those financial pressures? And he says, oh my God, I was losing it. So in November, close to December, I did this very comprehensive budget sheet where it had like 7 tabs for me to understand where is my money going with like formulas and everything. And so I was able to get some clarity with that. Eduardo shared that he planned to limit his personal spending and tighten his budget plan in order to ensure that he could still contribute to the household. The final theme that emerged in the data was immigration status, specifically how an undocumented immigration status complicated the work lives of Latino college graduates. I should note that most of the undocumented young adults in the sample were DACA recipients. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival and is a 2-year renewable work permit that's provided for a subsection of undocumented young people. DACA recipients felt ambivalent as they entered the job market. On the one hand, they felt very grateful that their work permit had provided them access to most jobs. For instance, Amanda became a teacher's aide after college and was well aware that this job was really only possible because she had access to the work permit. She says, I wouldn't be able to have this job without a social security number. Diana, also a DACA recipient, echoed similar sentiments. She said, DACA has given me the opportunity to work at her current occupation. It's given me the opportunity to work at other jobs that pay really well compared to those that do not have the same opportunity. And here, by what she says about those that don't have the same opportunity, she's referring to other undocumented young people who don't have access to DACA. On the other hand, the strict permit stipulations, the threats of termination generated a great deal of anxiety for the DACA holders. You may remember threats against DACA intensified during the Trump administration, and legal battles on the program's legitimacy had paused new applications for the program in 2017. Participants with DACA found it really difficult to create long-term plans about their future, and the DACA renewals reinforced their undocumented status in the workplace. For instance, Amanda shared, it's really draining having to do all that to renew her work permit. I'm already thinking about how at the end of this year, I'm going to have to renew it again. Is it the end of this year? I don't even remember. I have to check on my calendar. But I don't know if the prices are going to go up again. The application is ever changing. It's super confusing. It's costly, it's exhausting, and it's stressful. I just wish, although I appreciate it, I just wish it was different. I wish it was 4 years instead of 2. Only one of the participants disclosed that she did not have DACA and navigated the job market without the protections of work authorization. Melina graduated in June 2020 with a political science degree, and she prolonged her entry into the job market because she worried about her limited career options as an undocumented and undocumented person. Upon graduation, she received a temporary position to work with immigrant communities in the local area. The job worked well for her situation because it did not require a social security number, but the job only lasted 4 months. Now she worked at a local juice shop in Los Angeles and felt really frustrated about how her immigration status really limited her career options. She says, working at the juice shop was really, really hard for me to accept in the beginning. After graduation, I refused to work in low-wage work job because I felt like, I can't believe I went to college and now I'm working in a customer service type job. It was really hard for me to accept. Even finding a job, it's not something that I can just apply to. I have to find a job through asking a friend and also making sure that the job is safe for me in terms of whether or not they're going to check if I'm undocumented or not. Melina's experience underscores the complexity of highly educated, undocumented young people. Her transition to college, the workforce was riddled with distress as she worried about her limited career options. She aspired to work in a legal field, but was routinely denied access to law internships because she didn't have the right papers. Melina was unable to put her degree to use as her undocumented status prevented her from most jobs in the legal labor market. So to summarize, Latino young adults who graduated during the COVID-19 pandemic experienced tumultuous transitions into the labor market. The young adults shared how they pushed back their graduation dates or felt ill-equipped to be able to enter the world of work. They also mentioned how they faced a difficult time finding work and felt that most of the jobs that they held were not related to sort of their area of study. Most young adults noticed a tremendous increase in the financial support that they provided at home. And then finally, those without a permanent immigration status felt a lot of instability in the world of work. Now, I would imagine that there's several either educators or practitioners in the audience. And so I wanted to give some thought about sort of the implementations of, or the implications of this work, and sort of how my data and what I presented today can be used to create some resources to be able to help support future students. And I'm happy to discuss this in the Q&A, but these are kind of just some ideas that I thought about. One would be to implement sort of a mandatory once-a-week course titled something along the lines of Transitions into the World of Work, where students can learn about how to apply for jobs, how to negotiate salaries, how to tailor your skills to different jobs. Now, and I understand that a lot of career centers and a lot of career centers on college campuses already provide those important services. But I think it's often the case that students may not reach out to the career services. So I thought maybe a mandatory course can help expose students to this knowledge and maybe try to prepare them for sort of a college exit. Next, I argue that colleges should provide students access to university resources, whether this is access to libraries, definitely including healthcare for at least 1 year after graduation. And I know that universities do already do some of that for sometimes up to a summer after the graduation. But really what my data finds is that students are really struggling to find work and can struggle up to a year to land a good job. And I think the university can play an important role as students transition out of their student status by helping them provide sort of a short safety net until they can land on their feet with a good job. And then three, I want to push, many of our student support services to be inclusive of immigration status. A sizable population of immigrant origin students are undocumented, and increasingly, especially with DACA tied up in the courts, most recently, DACA was found unlawful in the state of Texas. We have a growing non-DACA undocumented student group on campus. And I think it's important for us to consider how our services are inadvertently excluding undocumented students who don't have DACA or don't have access to Social Security numbers if we are asking for Social Security numbers for programming, training, internships, and all those sorts of things. And with that, I just want to thank all of you for joining me this morning at NSF, the Center for Research on College to Workforce Transition, and Stony Brook University for helping me be able to fund this multi-wave project and execute the project. So I really look forward to chatting. I'm also open to sharing the slides too. If you want to shoot me an email, I have my email here in case anybody wants to chat further or we don't get to a specific question. But I really look forward to discussing the material I presented, and then also kind of discussing what can colleges do with the data I presented. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing with us. And everyone, if you can either go ahead and raise your hand, you can unmute yourself and begin speaking, but we certainly have lots of time for some questions and conversation. Vanessa, I really appreciate you offering some initial thoughts about what we may do, especially for supporting students.
And I think I'd also be interested too to learn about what if colleges are already thinking about these issues, right? Thinking about especially our Latino students who are becoming, fast, becoming one of the largest minorities in the United States. Many universities have, sort of on their forefront becoming HSIs, so Hispanic Serving Institutions. And so if your institution is also doing unique things, I would be really interested to kind of hear, what's going on the ground in other universities, or how other universities thinking of these issues. Especially when it comes to like the immigration laws. I think that that's something that universities are now starting to think about. How can colleges and universities support undocumented students in the face of perhaps more restrictive immigration policies coming from the federal, while understanding obviously we can't change immigration policies at the university, but then there's small changes that can be done to support our students, right? So I'd be excited to hear all that stuff. It doesn't have to be just specifically on the three things I touched on.
Great, thank you. Questions, comments? Any resources or ideas to share? So yeah, go ahead.
So I really appreciated your talk, and I was really interested to hear about how immigration status and undocumented status and worries about that really impinge on the job search process. On the other hand, a lot of the complaints or a lot of the reports that you offered, things like, well, the job isn't really what my major was, or, my job search was tough. In some respects, I've heard those complaints for years. And I don't know that they're particularly unique to either an undocumented or an immigrant or a Latino community. Could you talk a little bit more about what you found unique in the particular population that you studied, as compared to people of other groups at about the same age, just leaving college?
Absolutely. And actually, some of the research that we're starting to see now says that most young adults that were graduating during that time were having an extremely hard time, transitioning into the world of work. I think that the first two things that I presented are not necessarily unique to immigration related issues. That was just sort of like the COVID-19 disruptions. I think that was something sort of across the board that young people were experiencing. That, and then sort of the mismatch, the delayed starts, and then sort of not working in the area that they thought. Those were two things that I would say perhaps are more general things that all college students at that time that were transitioning were experiencing. But the last two I would say are definitely related to immigration status. One, I think, can be also for, just first gen low income students, the increased financial pressures. I thought that was something that was really interesting that I didn't realize that would just shoot up, because many of these young people, 2/3 of the sample had undocumented parents. And so because they had undocumented parents, their parents had access to very precarious jobs that were not secure, oftentimes had to do piecework here and there. And so they now became the ones that sort of had the most financial, stability, even with entry-level positions. So then they saw in their household, a number of different people, asking for support and so forth. I think about Manny, who helped his mom get a new car. His mom was not able to apply for credit or a loan because she's undocumented. She doesn't have access to that information. And she also doesn't want to put herself in a position where she could be deported. There's things about, sort of public charge that were going on at the time of sort of immigrants feeling or getting messages of not taking social services that are not meant for them in order to not be a burden. So that was something that came up a lot. And so these young people felt the responsibility to help out a lot more. So the increased financial pressures was definitely something that was related. And many talked about how their undocumented parents were in precarious situations, or their entire family was undocumented if they themselves were also undocumented too. And now they became sort of the top earners in their working class family. And then And then obviously, lastly, their own, those that were undocumented. That, was a huge one, where those that were, most of them had DACA, so they did have work permits. But if, you've seen anything, with what's been going on with DACA, it's sort of been up in the air since, 2017. No new applications have gone on since then. And even those young people who do have DACA have been constantly living in limbo of whether or not their status is going to be revoked. Are they, going to be able to work? So they're kind of trying to figure things out, and so forth. And so I think that those last two, I would say, are very closely tied to sort of being, from an immigrant origin college student.
Do you have a sense of how family structure shape those responses? My impression is that many of my especially first generation students, but I think also especially for first generation Latino students, the family structure shapes kind of that response a lot. Students, while they're in school, they often get pulled into things or sucked away. That's a thing. And then there was a question about internships that someone posted. I'd really like to hear your answer. I can share that I understand that's a challenge for undocumented students, especially who want to do internships in healthcare or pursue higher education in healthcare where they have mandatory hours, or in law-related professions for people like this.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The question.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Vanessa. I was just going to read the question for you. I don't know if
Okay.
you saw it. Did any of the students have internships while attending university?
Yes, and I just kind of wanted to touch base on the family relationships. So most of them had pretty positive, meaning that they at least had, I mean, obviously they had some issues here and there, but for the most part, they were tied, to their families and were well aware of things that were going on. Many had contemplated, even with the prior date or with the prior waves, had contemplated, how to juggle sort of family responsibilities with, now them living on campus and not being necessarily at home. Many immigration related things came up. So for instance, even when I first met the young people, most of them were in their first or second year, and many had talked about sort of the transition to college. Many of them were sort of the brokers, so translators in their family, helping them navigate connections with, healthcare, the bureaucracy, so forth, right? So they played a big role, and then them having to shift sort of that labor from now being from afar. Certainly if there were like catastrophic things, they definitely considered dropping out multiple times because they were like, I really need to be back home with my family and so forth. And so I think just family life and their college life was just so intertwined throughout. Ultimately, just one was the one that did ultimately just say, hey, this is just too much. Like, my mom really needs the help. We have nobody else. I also noticed that with family relationships, there was more pressure with the young people if they felt like their family was isolated. So like, let's say they had migrated and it was just kind of them. Like, they didn't have extended family, or most extended family was back either in Mexico or in Central America or wherever they came from. So if they felt like it's only just us, then they felt even greater pressure to be able to be there for their family members. And then with the question about did they have internships while attending university, the only ones that not so much, it didn't come up a lot, but the only ones that I do remember, if they were in the STEM. So I had a handful of young people that were like nursing or some type of things. I did, from the undocumented, like Melina, excuse me, she did talk about trying to be, her goal was to be a lawyer, and that's what she really wanted to do. And so she had tried to apply for different like legal internships. The university that I did this has a law school, so she was trying to get involved with that. But even some volunteer work required a social security number, and so she wasn't able to provide that because she did not have access to that. Those that did have access, like the DACA recipients that were undocumented, did talk about being able to take on jobs or different internships because they were able to have DACA and so forth. And so I did see sort of immigration status complicating that. Sometimes, even if we think about, hiring an RA, which is, I mean, I just moved to my university, so I haven't had a chance to hire one, but I've seen, some applications where you have to put like, they need their social security number or they need work study. And if you think about work study is tied to FAFSA, which is a federal aid, many undocumented students are not able to access federal aid. And so this was done in California. And so if they had any support, they had support from the California Dream Act, which is California giving money to these young people. And so, so it's things like that that perhaps seem sort of, not that big of a deal, but when it comes to the specific population, and I think I just really try to stress even more so now, I think recently, a couple of days ago, a judge in Texas declared on DACA that's unlawful. So still no new applications can happen. And that's been since 2017. And so if we think about, how to be inclusive of our undocumented students on campus, which is becoming more and more non-DACA young people, things like that, if we require social security numbers, we're excluding these young people from being able to, at minimum, try to get some experience or things that can boost their resumes and so forth when they enter the job market. One of the things that they can do is become self-employed. And so that's something that the university can do to help them sort of build, different services and resources to help them kind of build those skill sets. And then they can go off and become entrepreneurs. I know that a great deal at times become self-employed in order to be able to work and so forth. But overall, most students, if I did see them do internships, it was mainly for like different specializations, like they were doing nursing or something that sort of required them to do so. But for the most part, I didn't see them talking about that a lot. And the last thing I will say is that it also can be hard for the working class. All of the young people were of working class backgrounds. So many had part-time jobs instead of sort of the volunteer and the internships and so forth because they needed the money. And so I noticed that if anything, the young people were working part-time jobs rather than sort of internships that were very like career focused, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Vanessa. Any other questions? Go ahead. You can, again, type them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and start talking or raise your hand. And I know you spoke to this a little bit, Vanessa, but wanted to go back to the question about internships and curious if there were any of the students in your sample that were completing internships during college. And if so, if you have any perspective to offer on how that experience was impacted for them.
Definitely. I think that one that stands out to me is he wanted to be a nurse, and throughout his college was involved in some type of hospital internship where he was learning how to do, those sorts of things. It was really interesting because as it relates sort of to my research, it was interesting for him to kind of get the experience of, how to do vitals and, just the other things that they do sort of in the healthcare field, and how he was able to then use that to help his own parents out, and making sure like accompanying his parents to go to the hospital or clinic if they needed to, and kind of making sure that everything was being done smoothly and correctly. That was really interesting to see. Like I said, I don't remember a great deal of them doing internships. Those that did talk about doing internships did really like that and were able to sort of solidify whether this was something that I really wanted to do. Sometimes felt pressured. I think that the nursing student that I'm thinking about, I think he was just like, I have to complete a certain amount of hours. So I think that he was kind of doing that as, just something I need to do in order to complete my credentials. But that they did talk about how important and enriching it was. And I think something that's interesting about the internship is that I think that it was sort of facilitated too. I want to say that it's not like he had to kind of go out of his way to search for it. It was something that was sort of required along the way with his major. So I feel like he had sort of, I don't want to say an easier time, but an easier time compared to somebody who perhaps was just kind of looking for internships by themselves. And so I think that would be interesting to to kind of just think about in the future about internships that are sort of facilitated through, because I think even for our own majors, you can do a number of different things. You can do sort of like, I think that it's called like a capstone, where you can do like an internship and it's just like you find it and then, you know, good luck with you with whatever happens, or you do like a research project or something, right? And so I think for the very targeted majors, it was kind of seen as something that was a little bit more standardized. So I think that it'd be interesting to kind of see the different types of internships. If I had seen other internships, it was sometimes just more research related. I feel like it wasn't like a true internship, but it was more like a research apprenticeship kind of thing. And people were kind of just doing that on their own if they saw it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that's helpful context and information. I too was thinking, Carol, I know you posed the question in the chat. I was thinking about the question of internships. So our college internship study, one of the things that we found is students who were undocumented reported having a much more difficult time accessing different internship opportunities, similar to some of the challenges you described.
Yes.
And transitioning to the world of work, that some of those
Yes.
same barriers may exist for students at the college internship level.
So interesting. Do you have that report
Yes.
completed? Okay, I would love to see.
Yeah, and you know, we only had a small sampling of
Yeah.
folks who happened to be in that space, but we saw the same with international students as well. A lot of the barriers around being eligible to apply for certain internships, for example.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what I have seen, you know, universities do sort of implications of like, what does that mean if they're having a harder time? Sometimes I think that there can be, you know, barriers to finding internships, but I think a lot of it comes down to what are the requirements for the internship, and is it weeding a lot of students out? Because, you know, if I'm an undocumented, you know, young college student and I see, okay, I need a social in order to do that, I'm not going to pay for it, obviously. But what I have seen some universities do to try to support students is moving internships, and instead of it being sort of paid work in the sense of like, you know, completing, you know, W-9 or whatever, moving to do it sort of just scholarship based. So sometimes providing sort of scholarship, because then that way you don't necessarily need a social for that. Or providing a stipend based too. That's considered sort of another way if there's sort of money attached to the internship. Sometimes obviously credit is fine and everything. And that, you know, can be a quick way to kind of go around the social stuff. That's sort of what I've seen too, is people creating resources, but trying to do it through a stipend or scholarship based rather than sort of paid employment in the traditional sense. And I wonder, that would be really interesting to see that if universities are kind of adopting that, are we seeing a greater support for this, for the undocumented students specifically, if we implement those sorts of things too, so they can also get internship experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking at our time, and I just want to make sure that we respect everyone's time, and once again want to just thank Dr. Delgado for your presentation this morning. It was wonderful, and for engaging with us in conversation. Again, if you are here, if you would be willing to take just a moment to fill out our feedback survey. This is something that we do for each and every webinar from the CCWT as a way for us to understand the topics and understand the feedback that you may have, or what we might do as a center to address and meet needs or discuss topics that are important for you. So again, thank you, Vanessa. Please join me, everyone, and thank you, Vanessa. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. And like I said, if anybody would like the slides, sometimes people like that, I'm happy to share the slides as well. And it was really great talking to everybody.